The second hand fell like a dying breath. Emma watched it spiral to the floor of Whitmore's watch repair shop, the tiny piece of steel catching the late afternoon light streaming through the dusty windows. 3 months of steady work, 3 months of proving herself capable of handling delicate timepieces worth more than her annual rent. And now this. A single component no bigger than an eyelash threatening to unravel everything. The Patek Philippe lay open on her workbench like a patient on an operating table, its intricate heart exposed. She'd been replacing the mainspring when her hand had trembled. Just once, just for a second, and the balance wheel had shifted, sending the second hand flying free. Emma crouched down, searching the worn wooden floor between scattered tools and coffee-stained repair manuals. Her knees protested against the cold boards, a reminder that her 29-year-old body was already showing signs of too many late nights hunched over tiny mechanisms. "Found it," she whispered to herself, pinching the minuscule hand between her thumb and forefinger. Such a small thing to carry such weight. The watch belonged to James Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries, a man whose reputation for perfectionism had made even Mr. Whitmore, who'd been fixing timepieces since before Emma was born, nervous. The appointment was scheduled for 3 o'clock. Emma glanced at the shop's old wall clock, 2:47. She placed the wayward hand on a clean cloth beside the framed photo of her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, grinning gap-toothed in her school uniform. The picture was positioned carefully where she could see it while working, Lily's bright eyes serving as both motivation and reminder of what was at stake. The rent on their one-bedroom apartment in Somerville was due next week, and Lily's hearing aids needed replacing soon. The left one had been crackling for days. The bell above the shop door chimed with 3 sharp notes. Emma's stomach clenched as footsteps approached across the creaking floorboards, deliberate and unhurried. She looked up to find a man in a charcoal wool coat surveying the cluttered shop with the air of someone accustomed to environments far more pristine than Whitmore's 30-year collection of horological chaos. James Morrison was younger than she'd expected, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that looked recently cut and eyes the color of winter sky. His gaze moved from the rows of antique clocks lining the walls to the scattered watch parts on her bench, taking inventory with the methodical precision of someone who missed nothing. "Mr. Morrison," Emma stood, wiping her hands on the small towel she kept tucked into her belt. "You're early." Traffic was lighter than expected. His voice carried the subtle authority of someone used to being listened to, but without the condescending edge she'd braced herself for. He stepped closer to the workbench, his attention settling on the opened Patek Philippe. "How is she coming along?" Emma's throat tightened. The honest thing would be to explain about the fallen hand, to admit her mistake, and accept whatever consequences followed. The practical thing would be to reassemble the watch quickly and hope he didn't notice the slight irregularity in the second hand's movement until after she'd been paid. She picked up the tiny hand, holding it so he could see. "I need to be transparent with you. While I was replacing the mainspring, this component came loose. It's easily fixed, but I want you to know there was a minor setback." James Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his composed expression. "You're telling me about a problem instead of pretending it didn't happen." It seemed like the right thing to do. He studied her face with the same attention he'd given the watch parts, as if trying to decode something equally intricate. "When will it be ready?" "Tomorrow morning, if you'd like. I want to make sure the timing is perfect." "Take the time you need." He turned toward the door, then paused. "What got you interested in watch repair?" The question caught her off guard. "My grandfather, he taught me when I was young, said there was something honest about mechanical time, no shortcuts, no pretending. Everything has to work together or nothing works at all." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Sounds like a wise man." The shop bell chimed again, and Lily burst through the door like a small tornado, her purple backpack bouncing as she rushed toward Emma's workbench. She moved her hands in quick, fluid gestures, signing her excitement about a butterfly she'd seen on the walk from school. Emma's hands responded automatically, signing back her questions about Lily's day, but she was acutely aware of James Morrison still standing by the door, watching the exchange with an expression she couldn't read. Most people grew uncomfortable witnessing signed conversations, either staring too intently or averting their eyes with exaggerated politeness. Lily has moderate hearing loss, Emma explained, switching back to spoken English. We use sign language at home. I noticed she was signing. James took a step forward, his earlier stiffness replaced by something that looked like genuine curiosity. What did she just tell you? That there was a monarch butterfly on the fence outside Mrs. Chen's house, and she thinks it might be lost because it's almost winter. Lily had been studying James throughout the exchange, her 7-year-old assessment apparently favorable. She signed something quick and pointed at the opened watch. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wants to know if you're the man with the special watch that belonged to his daddy. The change in James Morrison's face was immediate and profound, like watching someone step from shadow into sunlight. She's very perceptive. He crouched down to Lily's eye level. Yes, it was my father's. He gave it to me before he died. Lily nodded solemnly, then signed something else. She says she's sorry about your daddy, and that my mommy will make your watch perfect because she's the best at fixing broken things. James rose slowly, his winter sky eyes finding Emma's across the cluttered workbench. I think your mommy might be right. Mr. Whitmore emerged from the back office, his usually jovial face wearing an expression Emma had learned to dread over the past few weeks. At 73, Harold Whitmore had been talking about retirement for years, but lately those conversations had taken on an urgency that made Emma's chest tighten with anxiety. Emma, could I have a word? He nodded politely toward James. Mr. Morrison, good to see you again. Harold, James's tone warmed considerably. I was just telling Emma she could take her time with the repair. That's generous of you. Mr. Whitmore glanced between them, then focused on Emma with the kind of look that meant difficult news was coming. Emma, I've had an offer on the shop. A serious one. The buyer wants to close within the month. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She'd known this conversation was inevitable, but hearing it spoken aloud made her legs feel unsteady. 3 months of steady work, of proving herself, of building something that felt like security for her and Lily, gone. I see. She kept her voice level, aware of James Morrison's presence, unwilling to show weakness in front of a client. Well, congratulations, Mr. Whitmore. You've earned a comfortable retirement. I wish the circumstances were different, dear. You know I'd keep you on if I could. Lily tugged on Emma's sleeve, signing a question. Emma forced a smile and signed back that everything was fine, that they'd talk at home. Children shouldn't have to worry about adult problems, even when those problems would inevitably become theirs too. If you'll excuse me, Emma said, I should get back to work. Mr. Morrison, I'll have your watch ready first thing tomorrow. James Morrison hadn't moved from his position near the door, but Emma could feel his attention like a weight. Actually, he said slowly, I wonder if we might discuss something, about the watch and about timing in general. Mr. Whitmore's bushy eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. Of course, I'll just check on things in the back. As the older man disappeared into the rear office, Emma found herself alone with James Morrison and her daughter, the autumn light slanting lower through the windows and casting long shadows across the workbench where his father's watch lay open like a question waiting to be answered. Lily signed something urgent to Emma, who couldn't help but smile at her daughter's directness. What did she say? James asked. She wants to know if you're going to help us keep the watch shop open. Emma met his gaze steadily. She says you have kind eyes, which means you probably have good ideas. James Morrison looked from Emma to Lily and back again. something shifting in his expression like the subtle adjustment of gears, finding their proper alignment. "As a matter of fact," he said quietly, "I think I might." The research rabbit hole began at 11 that night, after Lily had fallen asleep clutching her worn stuffed elephant. Emma sat cross-legged on their tiny living room couch, her laptop balanced precariously on a stack of library books about American Sign Language development. The Patek Philippe repair manual she'd borrowed from Mr. Whitmore lay open beside her, but her browser window told a different story entirely. James Morrison, 32, CEO Morrison Industries, founded 2019, specializes in medical device technology, estimated net worth. She closed the tab quickly, feeling like a stalker. What mattered was fixing his father's watch properly, not Googling her client's financial status at midnight. But curiosity won out, and soon she was deep in patent filings and business articles, learning that Morrison Industries held breakthrough technology for cochlear implant interfaces, devices that could change lives like Lily's. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here was a man whose company created miracles for children with hearing loss, while she struggled to afford basic hearing aids for her own daughter. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from her friend Sarah, a pediatric audiologist at Boston Children's Hospital. "How's the fancy watch repair going? Still planning to ask about Lily's consultation." Emma stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, just focusing on the work right now. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical November weather that made Boston feel like a city wrapped in wet wool. Emma arrived at Whitmore's an hour early, determined to have James Morrison's watch perfect before he arrived. She'd barely slept, her mind spinning through possibilities and worst-case scenarios in equal measure. The delicate work of reattaching the second hand required absolute steadiness. Emma took 3 deep breaths, settled into her familiar rhythm, and began. The mechanism clicked into place with satisfying precision, each component finding its proper relationship with the others. She wound the watch carefully and held it to her ear. The steady tick-tock sounded like contentment itself. At exactly 10 o'clock, the shop bell chimed. James Morrison stepped inside, shaking raindrops from his dark coat, and Emma felt the now familiar flutter of nervousness mixed with something she didn't want to examine too closely. "Good morning," he said, approaching her workbench with what appeared to be genuine anticipation rather than mere politeness. "It's ready." Emma lifted the watch from its velvet-lined box, the gold case catching the overhead light. "Would you like to check the timing?" Instead of immediately reaching for the watch, James pulled out his phone and opened the stopwatch function. "Let's see how accurate your grandfather's lessons were." For 30 seconds they stood in comfortable silence, both watching the synchronized movement of mechanical time against digital precision. When James's phone chimed, Emma stopped the watch. They compared, a difference of less than 2 seconds. "Remarkable," James said softly, finally taking the watch from her hands. The moment their fingers brushed, Emma felt an electric current that had nothing to do with static electricity from the dry indoor air. "My father would have been impressed." "Tell me about him." The words slipped out before Emma could stop them. "If you don't mind, that is." James fastened the watch around his wrist with practiced movements, but she noticed his hands weren't entirely steady. He was a watchmaker, actually. Learned the trade from his father in Switzerland before immigrating here in the 1970s. Built a small repair business in Cambridge. So watches run in the family. Time runs in the family. Dad used to say that understanding time was the key to understanding everything else, when to be patient, when to act, when to let go. James's voice carried the weight of old grief, carefully managed but never fully resolved. "He died of a sudden heart attack when I was 16. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. One minute we were arguing about my college applications, the next." Emma's heart clenched with recognition. She knew that particular flavor of loss, the conversations left unfinished, The love unexpressed because you thought you had more time. I'm sorry. This watch stopped working about 6 months after he died. My mother took it to 3 different repair shops, but none of them could fix it properly. Eventually, she put it away. James looked down at the watch face, where the second hand now moved in its perfect, endless circle. I found it last month when I was cleaning out her storage unit. Thought it might be time. Time for what? To remember him properly. To honor what he built instead of just carrying the grief. The shop bell chimed again, and Mr. Whitmore entered carrying 2 steaming cups from the cafe next door. "Thought you might need coffee," he said cheerfully, handing one to Emma. "Mr. Morrison, I don't suppose you'd like some. Rosa makes the best cortado in the North End." "That's kind of you, but I should head to the office." "Actually," Emma found herself saying, "if you have a few minutes, I'd love to show you something." She led James to the back corner of the shop where Mr. Whitmore kept his collection of antique chronometers, maritime timepieces that had once guided ships across oceans. Emma selected a 19th century piece, its brass case green with age but its mechanism still pristine. "Your father would have appreciated these," she said, opening the case to reveal the complex inner workings. "They're built for accuracy under the most challenging conditions. Salt air, rough seas, temperature changes, but they keep perfect time because every component is designed to work with the others, not against them." James leaned closer, genuinely engaged. "How do you know so much about these?" "I studied horology for 2 years before." Emma hesitated, then decided honesty had worked well the day before. "Before I had Lily and couldn't afford to continue, but I never stopped learning." "What would you do if you could finish your certification?" The question hit her like a small lightning strike. No one had asked her about her dreams in years. Most conversations focused on immediate needs, practical solutions, survival strategies. "Open my own shop eventually. Specialize in vintage restoration. There's something magical about bringing old timepieces back to life, giving them purpose again." "That sounds like more than just a career." "It feels like a calling, yes." James was quiet for a moment, studying the chronometer's exposed gears. "I have a proposition for you." Emma's pulse quickened. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that might solve several problems at once." Before James could elaborate, the shop door burst open with unusual force, and Lily stumbled inside, her school backpack askew and her face flushed with excitement or distress. Emma couldn't immediately tell which. "Sweetie, you're supposed to be in school," Emma said, immediately switching to sign language to check if something was wrong. Lily's hands moved rapidly, telling a story about a substitute teacher who didn't understand sign language, about feeling invisible and frustrated, about walking out of class because she couldn't make herself understood. "She left school?" James asked, his voice concerned but not judgmental. The substitute didn't know ASL, and Lily got overwhelmed. Emma knelt to her daughter's eye level, signing reassurance and gentle correction about the importance of staying in school even when things were difficult. James crouched down beside them. Slowly, carefully, he moved his hands in what Emma recognized as basic sign language, clumsy but clearly intentional. "Hello, my name is James." Lily's eyes widened with delight. She signed back rapidly, then looked expectantly at Emma. "She says you're learning sign language. She wants to know why." James looked slightly embarrassed. "I looked up some basic signs last night. Thought it might be useful." "Why?" Emma asked, though her heart was already supplying answers she didn't dare trust. "Because communication shouldn't require an interpreter. Because everyone deserves to be understood directly." Lily signed something else, grinning now. "She says you can learn more signs if you want. She's a good teacher." "I'd like that very much," James replied, then added in halting sign language, "Thank you." Lily clapped her hands with joy, the earlier distress completely forgotten in the face of this new possibility. She began signing more slowly, clearly intending to give James an impromptu lesson. Emma watched this exchange with wonder and growing alarm. She'd learned to be suspicious of kindness from people with resources. It so often came with strings attached, conditions that made acceptance feel like surrender. But James Morrison seemed genuinely interested in connecting with Lily, not in helping or fixing or saving. "About that proposition," Emma said, when Lily paused to find something in her backpack to use as a visual aid for her lesson. "Have lunch with me tomorrow. Let me explain what I have in mind." "I'm not sure that's—" "Bring Lily. There's a place in Cambridge that might interest you both." Mr. Whitmore, who had been pretending to organize inventory while clearly eavesdropping, cleared his throat meaningfully. "Emma, dear, might I suggest you listen to what the man has to say? Sometimes opportunities come disguised as ordinary conversations." Emma looked at James Morrison, this wealthy, powerful man who had spent his morning learning sign language and listening to her dreams as if they mattered, and felt the ground shift beneath her feet like the settling of old foundations preparing for new construction. "Okay," she said, "lunch tomorrow." Lily looked up from her backpack, having found the small kaleidoscope she always carried, and handed it to James with the kind of trust that made Emma's chest tight with fear and hope in equal measure. James held the kaleidoscope up to the light, turning it slowly to watch the colored fragments shift into new patterns, and Emma realized she was watching the exact moment when her carefully ordered world began to reorganize itself around possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The Harvard Museum of Natural History felt like stepping inside a kaleidoscope made of light and learning. Lily pressed her face against the glass case containing a collection of antique scientific instruments, her breath fogging the surface as she signed rapid questions about the brass telescopes and navigation tools displayed within. "She wants to know if these helped people find their way when they were lost," Emma translated, watching James crouch down to Lily's eye level once again. Over the past 24 hours, she'd noticed how naturally he adjusted his physical presence to meet her daughter where she was, literally and figuratively. James signed his response slowly but with growing confidence. "Yes, like a compass for the ocean." Lily's face lit up with understanding, and she signed back something that made Emma's cheeks warm. "What did she say?" James asked, though his slight smile suggested he'd caught at least part of it. "She said you're like a compass too, because you help people find what they need." Emma paused, then added quietly, "She also said you smell like expensive soap and coffee, which apparently means you're important." James laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his entire face. "She's not wrong about the soap. Italian bergamot. My assistant insists it projects confidence in board meetings." They moved through the museum at Lily's pace, stopping frequently to examine fossils and minerals and mechanical curiosities that spoke to the 7-year-old's fascination with how things worked. Emma found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected, watching James navigate the space with the same careful attention he'd given her workbench, missing nothing, judging little, engaging completely. "So," Emma said as they paused before a display of clockwork automatons, "this proposition of yours." "Right." James glanced toward Lily, who was absorbed in watching a mechanical bird spread its wings in endless repetition. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about finishing your certification, about opening your own shop." "James, if this is some kind of charity—" "It's not." His response was immediate and firm. "It's business. Morrison Industries has been looking into precision manufacturing partnerships. We need components that require the kind of exact mechanical expertise you demonstrated with my father's watch." Emma felt her defenses rise automatically. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not looking for a handout disguised as a contract." "Good, because I'm not offering one." James moved closer, his voice taking on the crisp authority she'd glimpsed the day before. "I'm offering a partnership. Morrison Industries provides funding for you to complete your certification and establish a restoration workshop. In exchange, you consult on precision mechanical components for our medical devices and train our technicians in traditional assembly techniques. The proposal hit Emma like cold water and warm honey simultaneously, shocking and sweet and completely overwhelming. You can't be serious. I'm always serious about business. But you barely know me. You've seen me work on exactly one watch. I've seen you work on my father's watch, James corrected. I've seen your integrity, your skill, your dedication to precision. I've seen how you handle pressure and how you communicate honestly even when it might cost you. Those aren't common qualities. Lily tugged on Emma's sleeve, having grown bored with the mechanical bird. She signed that she was hungry and asked if they could eat lunch now. Of course, sweetheart. Emma's mind was reeling, but her daughter's needs provided welcome grounding. James, could we continue this conversation over food? I think better when my blood sugar is stable. They found a quiet corner table in the museum cafe, where Lily immediately claimed the window seat and began an animated sign conversation about the squirrels she could see gathering acorns in the courtyard outside. Emma ordered a grilled cheese for Lily and soup for herself, while James chose a salad that he picked at absently. Tell me about the medical devices, Emma said, needing to understand the practical details before she could process the emotional implications. Cochlear implants primarily. We've developed new interface technology that allows for more natural sound processing, but the internal components require assembly precision that most manufacturers can't achieve consistently. James paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. The difference between adequate hearing restoration and exceptional hearing restoration often comes down to tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. Emma's breath caught. You're talking about hearing devices. I'm talking about giving people like Lily access to sound quality that could change her life. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and promise, and the kind of hope Emma had learned not to trust. That's not fair. What's not fair? Using my daughter's condition to make your offer more appealing. James set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, studying Emma's face with an expression that seemed equal parts frustrated and admiring. You're right. That was manipulative, and I apologize. The business proposal stands on its own merits, regardless of any personal benefits it might offer your family. His directness caught her off guard. Most people doubled down when called out on emotional manipulation, but James Morrison had just acknowledged it and apologized without defensiveness. However, he continued, the fact remains that Morrison Industries could benefit significantly from your expertise, and you could benefit significantly from our resources. Sometimes mutual advantage is just good fortune, not exploitation. Lily looked up from her grilled cheese, having followed enough of the conversation to sense tension. She signed a question to Emma, who translated automatically. She wants to know if you're arguing about something important. We're discussing a business opportunity, James replied, then added in sign language. Your mama is very smart. Lily grinned and signed back rapidly. She says she knows I'm smart, and she wants to know if you're smart too. What do you think? James asked Lily directly, his hands moving in the careful ASL he'd been practicing. Lily considered this seriously, studying James's face with the intensity she usually reserved for particularly complex mechanical toys. Finally, she signed her verdict. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks again. She says you're smart about some things but still learning about others, which makes you interesting instead of boring. High praise from a 7-year-old. She's a good judge of character. James was quiet for a moment, watching Lily return her attention to the squirrels outside. When he spoke again, his voice carried a vulnerability that made Emma's chest tighten. My father built his business from nothing, Came to America with a suitcase full of watch tools and a handful of English phrases. But he understood something I'm still learning, that success isn't just about accumulating wealth or power. It's about creating something that matters, something that connects people to each other and to time itself. And you think a partnership with me would do that? I think a partnership with you would honor what he taught me about the value of craftsmanship and the importance of keeping traditional skills alive in a digital world. Emma felt the familiar flutter of possibility mixed with terror. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to protect herself and Lily from the kind of disappointment that came with trusting powerful people. But there was something in James Morrison's eyes, a sincerity that seemed to run deeper than charm or strategy, that made her want to believe. "I'd need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course, take all the time you need." The cafe around them hummed with the quiet conversations of museum visitors and the gentle clatter of dishes being cleared. Outside, the November afternoon was growing dim, and the first scattered snowflakes of the season had begun to fall, dusting the courtyard like powdered sugar. Lily signed something urgent, pointing toward the window. "She says it's snowing, and that means winter is starting early this year." Emma smiled at her daughter's excitement. "She wants to know if we can go outside and catch snowflakes." "That sounds like an excellent idea," James said, already reaching for his coat. They spent the next 20 minutes in the museum courtyard, Lily racing between patches of grass and concrete, her tongue extended to catch the lazy snowflakes that drifted down like tiny frozen promises. Emma found herself standing beside James, both of them watching her daughter's joy with the kind of shared appreciation that felt dangerously intimate. "She's remarkable," James said quietly. "She is. So are you." Emma looked at him sharply, but his attention remained focused on Lily, who was now attempting to build a miniature snowman from the barely adequate accumulation on a nearby bench. "You don't know me well enough to make that judgment. I know you prioritize your daughter's happiness over your own security. I know you chose honesty over self-interest when it could have cost you a job. I know you see beauty and purpose in small, precise things that most people overlook." James turned to meet her gaze. "I know you're raising a confident, curious, joyful child despite circumstances that would have broken many people." The words hit Emma like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were kind. And she wasn't used to having her struggles acknowledged as strengths rather than failures. "That's just survival," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," James replied firmly, "that's grace." Lily ran back to them, her cheeks flushed pink with cold and excitement, signing rapidly about the snowman's need for a hat and scarf. Emma translated, grateful for the interruption, and James immediately offered his expensive wool scarf to complete the tiny figure. As they walked back toward the museum entrance, Lily between them chattering in sign language about winter and snow, and the magical way frozen water could transform familiar spaces, Emma felt the weight of James Morrison's proposition settling around her shoulders like a coat she wasn't sure she was ready to wear. The afternoon light was fading quickly now, and the temperature was dropping with the sun. Soon they would part ways, James to his world of board meetings and business decisions, Emma to her small apartment and the familiar routine of dinner and homework and bedtime stories signed in the lamplight. But something had shifted between them in the space of a few hours, something that felt as delicate and significant as the mechanism of an antique watch, all precision and potential energy waiting to be released. "I'll call you tomorrow," Emma said as they reached the museum's front steps. "I'll be waiting," James replied, and the promise in his voice made her believe that maybe, just maybe, some risks were worth taking after all. The call never came. Emma stared at her phone for the third time in 10 minutes, checking for missed calls or messages that refused to materialize. It had been 4 days since the museum, 4 days since she'd promised to call James Morrison with her decision about the partnership. 4 days of researching horology certification programs and sketching business plans on napkins and imagining a future that felt too good to be true. Which apparently it was. Mr. Whitmore looked up from the ancient cash register he was attempting to reconcile, his expression sympathetic. Still no word from Mr. Morrison. I'm the one who's supposed to call him, remember. Emma adjusted the loop attached to her workbench lamp, focusing on a 1940s Omega that needed a new mainspring. The familiar work should have been soothing, but her hands felt unsteady. Perhaps he's waiting for you to make the first move. Perhaps he's realized what a ridiculous idea it was to offer a partnership to someone he met exactly twice. Emma set down her tweezers and rubbed her eyes. I should have known better than to get my hopes up. The shop bell chimed, and Emma's heart performed a small gymnastics routine before settling back into disappointment. Not James Morrison, just Mrs. Chen from the flower shop next door, holding a delicate lady's watch with a cracked crystal. Emma, dear, could you take a look at this? It was my mother's, and I'm afraid I dropped it this morning. Of course, Mrs. Chen. Emma accepted the watch carefully, nodding the way the older woman's hands trembled slightly. This is beautiful, Swiss movement from the 1960s. 1963. She bought it for herself when she got her first job in America, said it was important to mark time properly in a new country. Emma felt a familiar tightness in her throat. Every watch told a story, carried someone's history in its mechanical heart. This was why she loved the work, not just the precision required, but the trust people placed in her to preserve what mattered to them. I can replace the crystal and service the movement. Should be ready by Friday. Thank you, dear. You know, Mr. Whitmore told me about the shop closing. I'm so sorry. Emma forced a smile. These things happen. We'll figure something out. After Mrs. Chen left, the shop felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were already beginning to close in. Emma tried to focus on the Omega repair, but her mind kept wandering to business plans that would never be implemented and dreams that felt increasingly foolish. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Lily's appointment moved to tomorrow 2 p.m. Dr. Martinez had a cancellation. Can you make it? Emma's stomach clenched. She'd been putting off scheduling the consultation about Lily's hearing aids, partly because of cost and partly because she'd been secretly hoping that James Morrison's mysterious cochlear implant technology might somehow become relevant. Another foolish hope to add to the growing collection. Yes, we'll be there, she typed back, then immediately began calculating whether she had enough in savings to cover the appointment fee if insurance didn't cooperate. The afternoon dragged by with only 2 customers, a college student needing a battery replacement and an elderly man who wanted an estimate on a pocket watch that would cost more to repair than it was worth. Emma gave him the bad news gently, watching his face fall as he realized his grandfather's timepiece was beyond saving. By 5 o'clock, the November darkness had settled over the north end like a familiar blanket. Emma was preparing to close when she heard footsteps on the sidewalk outside, quick, purposeful steps that made her look up hopefully before reminding herself not to be ridiculous. The shop door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and the scent of snow, but it wasn't James Morrison who entered. It was a woman in her early 60s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. Her silver hair was pulled into an elegant chignon, and she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Ms. Hayes, the woman's voice carried the crisp authority of old Boston money. I'm Victoria Morrison. I believe you know my son. Emma's blood turned to ice water. She'd seen photos of Victoria Morrison during her late-night research sessions, society pages and business articles that painted her as a formidable force in Boston's philanthropic and corporate circles. What she hadn't expected was the woman's physical presence, which somehow managed to fill the cluttered shop like expensive perfume. "Mrs. Morrison," Emma stood, wiping her hands on her work apron. "How can I help you?" Victoria Morrison's gaze swept the shop with the same methodical assessment Emma had noticed in her son. But where James's scrutiny had felt curious, his mother's felt calculating. "I understand James has made you a business proposition. He mentioned a potential partnership, yes." "I see." Victoria stepped closer to Emma's workbench, her attention settling on the opened Omega. "You do beautiful work. James showed me photographs of his father's watch after you repaired it. Quite impressive." Emma waited, her defensive instincts fully activated. Experience had taught her to be wary of compliments from people who wielded power like weapons. "However," Victoria continued, "I'm concerned about the wisdom of mixing business with other interests." "I'm not sure what you mean." "Oh, I think you do." Victoria's smile was perfectly polite and completely cold. "My son is a brilliant businessman, but he's also a romantic. He tends to see potential where others might see complications." The words hit Emma like physical blows. "Are you suggesting I'm a complication?" "I'm suggesting that you're a single mother with significant financial pressures, and my son is a wealthy man who's been known to confuse attraction with altruism." Victoria paused, letting the implications sink in. The partnership he's proposed, while I'm sure it seems generous, would ultimately be a disservice to both of you. Emma felt heat rising in her cheeks, a combination of humiliation and anger that made her hands shake. "With respect, Mrs. Morrison, your son is a grown man who can make his own business decisions." "Can he, when those decisions might compromise his position with the board of directors, when they might jeopardize expansion plans that could benefit thousands of patients?" Victoria's voice remained level, but steel had crept into her tone. "Morrison Industries is a public company, Ms. Hayes. Every partnership, every association, every relationship reflects on our brand and our mission." The shop felt smaller with each word, the familiar space suddenly foreign and hostile. Emma gripped the edge of her workbench, using the solid wood to anchor herself against the wave of shame and disappointment threatening to pull her under. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to consider whether accepting James's offer would really be in anyone's best interest, including your daughter's." The mention of Lily made Emma's vision blur with rage. "Leave my daughter out of this." "I'm afraid that's impossible. Your daughter's condition creates emotional complications that could cloud James's judgment. He's always been drawn to causes, to people he perceives as needing rescue." Victoria softened her voice, as if delivering a kindness. "I don't think either of you would benefit from a relationship built on that foundation." Emma stared at this elegant, powerful woman who had just reduced her entire life to a cause, and her daughter to an emotional complication. The rational part of her mind recognized that Victoria Morrison was probably protecting her son's interests as any mother might. The human part of her wanted to scream. "I see," Emma said quietly. "I hope you do. James is scheduled to present the partnership proposal to our board next week. If you were to withdraw your interest before then, it would save everyone considerable embarrassment." "And if I don't?" Victoria's smile sharpened. "Then I suppose we'll discover whether James values his personal inclinations more than his professional responsibilities." The shop door chimed as Victoria Morrison left, taking all the warmth from the room with her. Emma stood alone among the scattered watch parts and repair tools, feeling smaller and more foolish than she had since the days immediately following her divorce, when she'd first realized how completely unprepared she was to navigate the world as a single parent. Her phone buzzed with a text message. For one wild moment, she hoped it might be James, but the name on the screen was Sarah's. "Just heard from Dr. Martinez's office. Lily's hearing has deteriorated more than we thought. We need to discuss surgical options." Emma read the message 3 times before its meaning sank in completely. Lily needed surgery. Expensive surgery that their insurance might not fully cover. Surgery that would require time off work and specialist consultations, and the kind of financial resources Emma simply didn't have. She looked around the shop that would soon belong to someone else, at the tools and timepieces that represented everything she'd worked toward, at the photograph of Lily grinning gap-toothed in her school uniform. The weight of small things, a broken watch, a mother's fears, a rich woman's disapproval, seemed to settle on her shoulders like snow accumulating on a roof that wasn't built to bear the load. Emma pulled out her phone and stared at James Morrison's contact information. She could call him now, accept the partnership, take the risk of trusting that his offer was genuine rather than pity dressed up as business sense. Or she could listen to his mother's warnings and protect herself from the kind of disappointment that might break what was left of her carefully constructed life. Outside, the first real snowstorm of the season was beginning, the kind of early winter weather that made Boston feel like a city under siege. Emma watched the flakes accumulate on the shop windows and thought about time, how it moved forward regardless of readiness, how it demanded choices even when all the options felt impossible. She closed her phone without making the call and began the slow process of closing up the shop, each familiar task feeling like a small goodbye to the future she'd allowed herself to imagine for exactly 4 days. Tomorrow, she would take Lily to the doctor and learn the full scope of what her daughter needed. Tomorrow, she would figure out how to be strong enough for both of them, the way she always had. But tonight, in the gathering darkness of a North End winter evening, Emma Hayes allowed herself to grieve the loss of possibilities that had felt, for one brief and shining moment, like promises the universe had been preparing to keep. The waiting room at Boston Children's Hospital smelled like industrial disinfectant and fear. Emma sat beside Lily on a child-sized chair that made her feel like an oversized imposter, watching her daughter color with the fierce concentration that meant she was nervous but trying not to show it. Lily's latest audiogram lay folded in Emma's purse, the jagged lines on the chart telling a story she'd been dreading. Moderate hearing loss progressing towards severe. Without intervention, Lily might lose most of her remaining natural hearing within the next 2 years. The cochlear implant surgery we discussed would give her access to sound ranges she's never experienced. Dr. Martinez had explained during their consultation that morning, his kind voice delivering devastating practicalities. But the procedure isn't covered entirely by your insurance plan. We're looking at approximately $40,000 in out-of-pocket expenses. $40,000. The number had echoed in Emma's head for hours, growing heavier with each repetition. She made $32,000 a year working part-time at Whitmore's. Her savings account contained exactly $843. Lily looked up from her coloring book, a detailed illustration of mechanical gears that she was turning into a rainbow of interconnected wheels, and signed a question about when they could go home. "Soon, sweetheart," Emma signed back, forcing her expression into something that resembled calm. "Just waiting to talk to one more person." Dr. Martinez had referred them to a financial counselor, a woman whose job was apparently to help families figure out how to afford miracles they couldn't pay for. Emma had agreed to the meeting because saying no felt like giving up on her daughter, but she harbored no illusions about the outcome. "Mrs. Hayes." Emma looked up to find a young woman in scrubs approaching, but it wasn't the financial counselor. It was Sarah Kim, looking professionally concerned and personally worried in the way that meant bad news was coming. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I was consulting on a case when Dr. Martinez mentioned you were here today." Sarah glanced around the waiting room, then lowered her voice. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know it's coming from a place of caring, not judgment." Emma's stomach clenched. "What is it?" "Have you considered reaching out to James Morrison? I know you mentioned he works in medical technology, and Morrison Industries has some of the most advanced cochlear implant research in the country. They also have a foundation that provides assistance for families who— No, the word came out sharper than Emma intended. Absolutely not. Emma. I said no, Sarah. I'm not calling James Morrison to ask for charity so he can feel good about helping the poor single mother and her deaf daughter. Sarah's expression shifted from concern to confusion. I don't understand. I thought you two had connected. You seemed so hopeful when you mentioned the partnership possibility. Emma felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in her throat. That was before I understood what kind of connection it really was. Before Sarah could respond, a voice called Emma's name from across the waiting room. But it wasn't the financial counselor. It was James Morrison, looking harried and slightly out of breath, his expensive coat dusted with snow from the storm that had been building all afternoon. Emma's heart performed the same gymnastic routine it had been practicing for days, except this time it stuck the landing wrong and left her feeling dizzy. "What are you doing here?" "Dr. Kim called me." James glanced at Sarah, who suddenly found her clipboard extremely interesting. She thought I should know about Lily's situation. The betrayal hit Emma like a physical slap. "You called him. Sarah, how could you?" "I called him because I care about Lily, and because sometimes pride is a luxury we can't afford." Sarah's voice carried the authority of someone who dealt with desperate families every day. "James, thank you for coming." "Of course." James approached slowly, as if Emma were a wounded animal who might bolt at any sudden movement. "Emma, we need to talk." "No, we don't. We really, really don't." Emma stood, gathering Lily's coloring supplies with shaking hands. "Lily, get your coat, we're leaving." But Lily had spotted James and was already signing an enthusiastic greeting, her earlier nervousness forgotten in the face of this unexpected visit from her new favorite adult. James responded in ASL, his skills noticeably improved even from their museum outing. "Hello, Lily, how are you feeling?" "Scared about the doctor, but better now that you're here," Lily signed back, then looked expectantly at Emma to translate. "She says she's fine," Emma lied, unable to bear the weight of her daughter's innocent honesty. James's expression suggested he'd understood more of Lily's response than Emma had credited him with. He crouched down to Lily's eye level, signing carefully. "It's okay to be scared. Being scared means something is important to you." Lily nodded solemnly, then signed something rapid and complex. "What did she say?" James asked, looking to Emma. Emma hesitated, then decided that honesty had gotten her into this mess and might be the only thing that could get her out of it. "She said the doctors want to do surgery to help her hear better, but it costs too much money, and she's worried about making Mommy sad." James's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, understanding, and something that looked dangerously like determination. "Lily, would you like to come with me to see something cool while your mom and Dr. Kim finish talking?" "James, I don't think," Emma started. "There's a children's garden on the third floor with a mechanical water feature that I think she'd enjoy. Sarah can come with us if it would make you more comfortable." Lily was already tugging on Emma's sleeve, signing her excitement about mechanical water. Against her better judgment, Emma found herself nodding. "10 minutes," she said firmly, "then we're going home." As James and Sarah led Lily toward the elevators, chattering in a mixture of sign language and spoken words that somehow felt like the most natural conversation in the world, Emma sank back into her child-sized chair and tried to figure out how her carefully controlled life had spiraled so completely beyond her management. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me in the hospital coffee shop on the first floor. We need to discuss your conversation with my mother. James." Emma stared at the message, her pulse hammering in her throat. He knew about Victoria Morrison's visit, which meant he knew about the warnings, the implications, the suggestion that Emma was nothing more than a charity case with romantic complications. 20 minutes later, Emma found James at a corner table in the hospital's cafe, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between his hands. He looked up as she approached, and she was startled by the exhaustion in his eyes. "How long have you known?" Emma asked without preamble, sliding into the opposite chair. "My mother told me about her visit to your shop 3 hours ago when Sarah called to tell me about Lily's appointment." James rubbed his face with both hands. "Emma, I am so sorry. I had no idea she would." Would what? Protect her son's interests. Point out the obvious complications of mixing business with charity cases. Emma kept her voice level, but she could feel the anger building like pressure in a steam engine. She wasn't wrong, James. This whole partnership idea was never about business, was it? It was absolutely about business. Then why didn't you call me back? Why didn't you follow up on your generous offer to save the poor single mother and her shop? James was quiet for a long moment, staring into his untouched coffee. When he looked up, his expression held the same vulnerability she'd glimpsed at the museum, but deeper now, rawer. "Because I was terrified." "Of what?" "Of you thinking exactly what you're thinking now. Of this conversation, where you look at me like I'm just another wealthy guy who mistakes pity for partnership." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Of realizing that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about business for me and became about something I've never been very good at." Emma felt something crack inside her chest, a small fissure in the defensive wall she'd spent 4 days building. "James, I fell in love with you, Emma. Completely, hopelessly, inconveniently in love with you. With your integrity and your skill and the way you make even the smallest mechanical repair seem like an act of faith in the future." He looked directly at her, his winter sky eyes holding nothing back. "I fell in love with Lily's curiosity and courage, and with the way you've raised her to see the world as a place full of wonder instead of obstacles. And yes, I fell in love with the idea of being part of something that mattered, something that honored my father's memory by keeping traditional craftsmanship alive." The coffee shop noise faded to background static. Emma could hear her own heartbeat, feel the weight of words she'd never expected to receive. "But I also know that loving someone doesn't give me the right to rescue them, especially when they don't need rescuing," James continued. "You're not a charity case, Emma. You're not a project or a cause or a way for me to feel good about my privilege. You're a brilliant artisan who deserves a partner, not a benefactor." Emma felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. "Your mother thinks I'm taking advantage of your romantic impulses." "My mother thinks a lot of things that have more to do with her fears than with reality." James reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. "The partnership offer was legitimate, Emma. Morrison Industries genuinely needs your expertise. The board has already approved the preliminary proposal based purely on the business case." "But your mother said—" "My mother said what she thought would protect me from making what she considers a mistake. She doesn't understand that the only mistake would be letting you walk away, because I was too much of a coward to fight for what matters." Emma stared at this man who had just laid his heart on the table between 2 cups of cold coffee and felt the last of her defensive walls crumble. "I'm scared, James. I'm scared of trusting you and being wrong. I'm scared of Lily getting attached and then losing another person who matters to her. I'm scared of accepting help and finding out it comes with strings I can't afford to pull." "I'm scared too," James admitted. "I'm scared of screwing this up because I've never wanted anything to work out as much as I want this to work out." They sat in silence for a moment, two people who had spent their lives being strong for others, finally admitting their own fragility. "The surgery Lily needs," James said quietly. "Morrison Industries Foundation covers exactly this type of procedure. Not because of our personal connection, but because it's what we do. We've helped over 200 families in New England alone." "James, I'm not offering charity, Emma. I'm offering you information about a resource that exists whether we ever see each other again or not. He pulled a business card from his wallet and set it on the table. This is Dr. Elizabeth Chen, our foundation's medical coordinator. She can walk you through the application process if you're interested. Emma picked up the card, turning it over in her fingers. And the partnership? Completely separate. The board meets Monday morning to review the proposal. If you're interested, I'll send you the formal documentation tonight. If you're not, I'll present alternative options and Morrison Industries will find another way to solve our precision manufacturing challenges. And us. James smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness she'd seen from him since he'd arrived at the hospital. Us is whatever you want it to be, at whatever pace feels right for you and Lily. I'm not going anywhere, Emma. I've waited 32 years to meet someone like you. I can wait as long as it takes for you to trust that this is real. Through the cafe windows, Emma could see the snow falling more heavily now, transforming the familiar city into something magical and new. Change was coming whether she was ready for it or not. The season was turning, Lily was growing up, the future was arriving at its own relentless pace. She thought about her grandfather's words about mechanical time, about how everything had to work together or nothing worked at all. She thought about Victoria Morrison's warnings and Sarah's intervention, and the weight of small things that could change the trajectory of an entire life. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." Emma reached across the table and took James's hand, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones like warmth after a long, cold walk. Okay to all of it. The partnership, the foundation, the possibility of us figuring out what comes next. James's smile could have powered the entire hospital. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that I want to try. I'm sure that Lily deserves every opportunity we can give her. And I'm sure that my grandfather would have liked you very much. Because of my appreciation for precision timepieces. Because you understand that the most important things in life can't be rushed, but they're always worth the wait." Outside, the storm continued to build, but inside the warm cafe, surrounded by the gentle hum of hospital life continuing all around them, Emma Hayes felt time slow down to the perfect rhythm of a heart that had finally learned to trust in the possibility of being loved exactly as she was. 3 months later, the sign above the door read Hayes and Morrison Timepieces, in elegant gold lettering that caught the early April sunlight. Emma stood on the sidewalk outside what had once been Whitmore's shop, marveling at how different everything looked with fresh paint and new display windows, yet how fundamentally the same it remained where it mattered most. The workshop still smelled like oil and metal, and the particular satisfaction that came from bringing broken things back to life. The familiar tools hung in their designated places, though now they were joined by equipment Emma had only dreamed of owning. Precision measuring devices and specialized repair stands that made her work faster and more accurate than she'd ever imagined possible. "Nervous?" James asked, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee from Rosa's cafe next door. He'd learned her preferences over the winter, dark roast with a splash of cream, no sugar, the same way he'd learned her daughter's favorite bedtime stories, and the exact pressure required to massage the tension from Emma's shoulders after long days spent hunched over intricate mechanisms. "Terrified," Emma admitted, accepting the warm cup gratefully. "What if no one comes? What if I've overestimated the market for artisanal watch repair in Boston? Then we'll figure out what comes next, together." James's voice carried the steady confidence she'd come to rely on, the certainty of someone who had learned to plan for obstacles without being paralyzed by them. "But I don't think that's going to be a problem." He was right. By 10:30, Emma had 3 customers waiting while she explained the intricacies of mainspring replacement to a teenager whose great-grandfather's pocket watch had stopped working the day before his college graduation. Word had spread through the North End's tight-knit community, about the young woman who could resurrect timepieces that other repair shops had declared hopeless, and curiosity had brought a steady stream of visitors to the newly opened Hayes and Morrison timepieces. The partnership had materialized exactly as James had promised: legitimate, profitable, and built on mutual respect rather than romantic sentiment. Morrison Industries' precision manufacturing needs dovetailed perfectly with Emma's expanding expertise, while the consulting fees provided the financial stability she'd never dared hope for. More importantly, the work challenged her in ways that made each day feel like a small adventure in problem-solving. At noon, the shop bell chimed with its familiar three-note song, and Lily burst through the door with the energy that meant school had ended early for some reason Emma had probably forgotten about. "Mommy," Lily's voice rang clear and true, each word perfectly enunciated thanks to the cochlear implant surgery that had transformed her world over the winter. She still used sign language. It remained their private communication, their special connection. But now she moved fluidly between both worlds, hearing and deaf, with the confidence of someone who belonged fully in each. "Hi, sweetheart, how was school?" "Amazing. Mrs. Patterson let me explain how gears work to the whole class, and Tommy Chen asked if you could fix his grandfather's music box, because his mom said you're the best at making old things sing again." Emma felt the familiar warmth that came from seeing her daughter thrive. Lily had adapted to her improved hearing with characteristic enthusiasm, approaching sounds with the same methodical curiosity she'd always applied to mechanical puzzles. Music, especially, had become a source of wonder. She could listen to the same piece dozens of times, analyzing how different instruments worked together to create harmony. "Where's James?" Lily asked, looking around the shop with the proprietary interest of someone who considered it partly hers. "Board meeting with his mother," Emma replied, then added with a slight smile, "though he promised to be back in time for your lesson." Over the winter, James had become not just Emma's partner in business and life, but Lily's self-appointed instructor in what he called advanced mechanical theory. Their weekly sessions involved taking apart old clocks and radios, studying how components related to each other, and building fantastical contraptions that served no purpose except to demonstrate cause and effect. Emma had initially worried about the mess and the potential safety hazards, but watching her daughter's face light up as she grasped increasingly complex concepts had convinced her that some kinds of chaos were worth tolerating. The afternoon passed in the comfortable rhythm Emma had grown to love, customers bringing broken timepieces and broken hearts, both of which seemed to require similar patience and attention to detail. She was working on a delicate lady's watch from the 1920s when she became aware of raised voices outside the shop. Through the window, she could see James and his mother standing on the sidewalk, their body language suggesting a conversation that had moved beyond polite disagreement into something more heated. Emma felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Over the months, Victoria Morrison had maintained a carefully neutral stance toward the partnership and toward Emma herself, but neutrality wasn't the same as acceptance. The shop door opened with more force than necessary, and James entered looking like a man who had just survived a small war. "Everything okay?" Emma asked quietly, aware that Lily was listening from her perch at the counter where she was supposedly doing homework, but was actually designing what appeared to be a mechanical butterfly. "Mother has some concerns about the expansion plans," James said, his voice carefully controlled. "She feels we're moving too quickly, taking on too much risk." Emma nodded, though she suspected Victoria Morrison's concerns had less to do with business strategy and more to do with the gold band that had appeared on James's left hand 2 weeks earlier. The engagement had been Emma's idea, a practical decision that made sense given their increasingly intertwined lives and Lily's obvious attachment to the man who had become her unofficial stepfather. The proposal itself had been characteristically unconventional. Emma had simply asked, One evening while they were cleaning up after dinner, whether James thought marriage was a reasonable next step for their partnership. His answer had involved considerable kissing and a hastily purchased ring that Lily had helped select, insisting that it needed to have gears etched into the band because that's what makes things work together properly. "Is Grandma Victoria mad about the wedding?" Lily asked with the directness that made adult conversations impossible to hide from her. Emma and James exchanged glances. They'd been calling Victoria Grandma since the engagement, partly because it seemed to make Lily happy and partly because it appeared to fluster the older woman in ways that were oddly endearing. "She's not mad," James said carefully. "She's just adjusting to changes." "Maybe she needs more time to understand how gears work," Lily suggested with 7-year-old wisdom. "Like when I got my implant and everything sounded weird at first, but then my brain figured out how to make sense of it all." James crouched down to Lily's eye level, a gesture Emma had seen hundreds of times but which still made her heart skip slightly. "You know what? I think you're exactly right." The shop door chimed again, and this time Victoria Morrison entered, her expression carefully composed but her eyes slightly red around the edges. She looked around the space, at the restored antique clocks ticking in gentle synchronization, at the workbench where Emma had arranged tools with museum-quality precision, at the framed photograph showing 3 generations of Morrison men with their treasured timepieces. "I owe you an apology," Victoria said, addressing Emma directly. "Several apologies, actually." Emma set down her loop and gave Victoria her full attention. "You don't need to." "I do, actually. I spent so many years protecting James from what I perceived as threats that I forgot to trust his judgment about what actually deserved protecting." Victoria's voice carried the controlled emotion of someone unaccustomed to admitting mistakes. "You're not taking advantage of my son, Emma. If anything, you've given him something I was never able to provide, a sense of purpose that goes beyond profit margins and board meetings." "Mrs. Morrison." "Victoria, please. We're going to be family soon, after all." The older woman's smile was tentative but genuine. "I've been watching the two of you work together, seeing how James has changed over these months. He's happier than I've seen him since his father died. More grounded." Lily looked up from her mechanical butterfly design. "That's because Mommy taught him about how time works. Not just clock time, but people time too." "People time?" Victoria asked. "Like how you can't hurry fixing something that's broken, but you can't wait too long either, or it gets more broken." Lily's explanation carried the authority of someone who had observed considerable mechanical repair over her short lifetime. James used to try to fix everything really fast, but Mommy showed him that slow and careful works better. Victoria laughed, a sound of genuine delight that transformed her entire face. "Lily, you are remarkably wise for 7 years old." "I'm almost 8, Lily corrected. "And James says wisdom comes from paying attention to how things actually work instead of how you think they should work." Emma felt something ease in her chest, a tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The approval of Victoria Morrison had never been her goal. She'd learned to be suspicious of validation that could be withdrawn as easily as it was granted. But having it removed a complication she hadn't known how to navigate. "There's something else," Victoria continued, reaching into her handbag and withdrawing a small velvet box. "This belonged to James's great-grandmother, and before that to her mother. It's been waiting for the right person to carry it forward." She opened the box to reveal a delicate pendant watch, no larger than a silver dollar, its case engraved with intricate patterns that spoke of old-world craftsmanship. The chain was gossamer fine gold, and the whole piece radiated the quiet elegance that came from being treasured across generations. "It needs restoration," Victoria admitted. "The movement hasn't worked properly in decades, but I thought perhaps you might be willing to take on the project, as a wedding gift and as my way of welcoming you officially into the family." Emma accepted the box with trembling hands, her professional eye immediately cataloging the watch's potential challenges and possibilities. It was beautiful, complicated, and absolutely repairable with patience and skill. "I would be honored," she said quietly. "Good." Victoria's smile held warmth that Emma had never seen before. "Because I suspect this little timepiece has been waiting for someone who understands that the most precious things are worth whatever time they require." The afternoon sunlight slanted lower through the shop windows, casting long shadows across the workbench where Emma had spent the morning bringing other people's treasures back to life. Outside, Boston was settling into the gentle rhythm of spring, cherry trees blooming along the Charles River, students emerging from winter hibernation, the whole city stretching toward longer days and the promise of renewal. James moved to stand beside Emma, his arms settling around her waist with the comfortable ease of someone who had learned to claim his place in her life gradually, respectfully, permanently. Lily bounced between them, signing excited questions about the pendant watch and whether she could help with its restoration. "What do you think?" James asked quietly, his voice meant for Emma alone, ready for the next challenge. Emma looked around the shop that bore her name, at the man who had become her partner in every sense that mattered, at the daughter who had taught them both that communication didn't require perfect hearing, and that love didn't require perfect circumstances. She thought about her grandfather's lessons about mechanical time and her own hard-won understanding of people time, about the weight of small things and the way precision could create beauty from the most unlikely components. "I think," she said, opening the pendant watch to examine its delicate movement, "that we're just getting started." Through the window, she could see the first tourists of the season beginning to explore the North End's narrow streets, drawn by the promise of discovery and the particular magic that came from finding treasures in unexpected places. The spring light caught the gold lettering on the shop sign, and Emma realized that she had finally learned the difference between being rescued and being truly seen. Time moved forward at its own relentless pace, as it always had and always would. But now Emma moved with it instead of against it, her hands steady and sure as she prepared to repair one more precious thing that had been waiting patiently for someone who understood that the most important work happened slowly, carefully, with attention to the smallest details that made the whole mechanism sing. The pendant watch ticked once in her palm, a single, perfect note that promised many more to come, and Emma Hayes Morrison smiled as she began the delicate work of giving time itself a second chance.